Good evening. My name is Sue Smerick, and I'm a member of the League of Women Voters of the Ann Arbor area. I welcome you to the online forum featuring candidates for Michigan's 12th Congressional District for the United States House of Representatives. The candidates will be on the primary election ballot on Tuesday, August 4th. This year, the League of Women Voters is celebrating 100 years of expanding voter rights, educating voters, and shaping and influencing legislation at the local, state, and national levels. We are pleased to sponsor these forums. The League is a nonpartisan civic organization that encourages informed and active participation by all citizens in government. The League works to increase understanding of major public policy issues and seeks to strengthen and broaden knowledge about our form of government and democracy. While the League does not support candidates or parties, we do take stands on issues we have studied. One of the League's most important goals is to assist voters in making informed choices at the polls, and thus we bring you tonight's program. Our moderator this evening is Jeff Smerick, who will explain the format and get us started. Jeff?
Thank you, Sue, and thank you everyone for joining us for this important forum. And now it's my honor to introduce the two candidates running for Michigan's 12th Congressional District for the United States House of Representatives, Congresswoman Debbie Dingell and Mr. Solomon Rajput. Welcome, candidates. Thank you for participating. The forum today will have this format. Each candidate will have an opening statement of up to 1 minute. Each candidate will have a closing statement of up to 90 seconds. In between, I will ask questions which came from the Ann Arbor community. Each candidate will have 2 minutes please, to respond to a question. At appropriate times, a sign on the screen will indicate the time remaining, 30 seconds, and then stop. If you have used up your time, you will be allowed to finish your sentence, and then your microphone will be muted, so the other candidate has an equal opportunity to participate. The candidates for this forum will begin speaking in alphabetical order. Depending on the number of questions we get to, all candidates will have an equal opportunity to be the first or last to answer the questions. And now to the opening statements. Congresswoman Dingell, may we have your opening statement, please? Oh, Congresswoman, we need to unmute you. There we go.
Thank you, Jeff. And thank you to the League of Women Voters for the role that you've played in protecting our democracy for 100 years. I'm Debbie Dingell, and I'm asking for your vote on August 4th in this primary. The world has been turned upside down by COVID. Too many of us have lost people that we love, and we don't know when the world's going to return to normal. The death of George Floyd has finally turned to a national discussion we need to have on systematic race discrimination in this country. There are many issues here at home that we need to be worrying about, from water shut-offs to the PFAS contamination, plume, and making sure that if you're sick, you're able to go to the doctor when you need to go to the doctor, and you aren't worried if you don't get COVID, if you can afford to take 14 days off of work. I want to work with the people of the downrivers, to the students at the University of Michigan, the young and old, and the working men and women of this district for the issues that we care about, of which there are many, and we can make a difference.
Thank you, Congresswoman Dingell. Mr. Rajput, may we have your opening statement, sir? Oh, you need to unmute yourself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Solomon Rajput. I am running for Congress of the United States here in Michigan's 12th Congressional District. I'm actually a medical student, and I'm taking a leave of absence from because I think the issues in our country are way too urgent, and we're done waiting on politicians to do something about it. And so when I tell people I'm a medical student and I'm running for Congress, everyone gets so confused. They're like, a medical student? What is a medical student doing running for Congress? Is that even allowed? I don't get it. And I understand it's pretty confusing, but I think I've got a halfway decent answer to how this whole thing came about. So when I was younger, I was really passionate about politics. I was taking a look at our messed up status quo and all of the big issues that we've got going on, the cost of healthcare, the cost of college, our climate change crisis. And I was thinking, you know what, it'd be really great to do something about these issues. Maybe I'll get involved in politics or government to try to solve some of these problems. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized, oh wait, actually you can't count on the government to get anything done. Like they will never do anything because they're just bought and sold by big corporations. So I realized that politics wasn't for me, but times are changing now. And we've got a whole new generation of leaders who are saying, we're not gonna be holding corporate interests any longer. We're gonna go out there and fight unapologetically for what people in this country need for us to get done. And that's why I'm running. And I hope that I can earn your vote on August 4th.
Thank you, Mr. Rajput, and thank you, candidates. And now to the questions. As a reminder, I will be reading each question once, and it will not be repeated unless I'm asked to repeat it. The first question starts with you, Mr. Rajput. 4 months ago, President Trump said, quote, anyone who wants a COVID test can get one, unquote. It was not true then, and it's not true now. Since then, 134,000 Americans have died from COVID-19, and over 6,250 Michiganders have died from COVID-19. Today, over 3 million Americans are infected with COVID, and we still don't have sufficient testing, personal protective equipment, or contact tracing. What should Congress do to get us out of this public health COVID crisis?
What Congress needs to do absolutely right now is to pass Medicare for all for everyone in this moment. I think at this point, we've all seen how inadequate our healthcare system is. It could not be a more dysfunctional or dystopic healthcare system that is in the United States of America. Right now, in the middle of our coronavirus pandemic, not only do you have to be worried about getting the virus, but you have to be worried about losing your job, and in doing so, losing your healthcare. The United States is the only developed country that insists that people cannot have healthcare in this country as a right. That's precisely why I support Medicare for all, and I appreciate Congresswoman Dingell's leadership on Medicare for all as well, because that is something that needs to happen, because at this point, we're also behind so many developing countries. I think it's pretty simple. I mean, as a medical student, I've seen this up close and personal. As medical students, we're like mini doctors. We go, we see patients, we try to figure out what's going on with them. So often we have to tell people, well, we know exactly what's going on with you and we've got the perfect thing for you, but we can't give it to you because your health insurance doesn't cover it. And now that I'm running, there's some pretty heartbreaking stories that I've seen. One story in particular really stands out. It's a story about a sophomore at a local university in our district, and she was telling me about her mom. Her mom was getting pretty sick, but they didn't have health insurance. So the mom said, well, there's no way in hell I'm going to see a doctor because we can't afford that. Someone tried to tough this one out. But she kept getting sicker and sicker, and ultimately she got so sick, they had to go see the doctor. Turns out she'd waited too long, and this disease that could have totally been treated if she'd seen a doctor earlier ended up actually killing her. So it's not an exaggeration to say that that lady was killed by a broken healthcare system. Because if she had gotten sick in any other developed country, there's a really good chance she'd still be alive today. Because what has every other developed country been able to figure out? They've been able to figure out how to make healthcare human right, which is just a fancy way of saying, if you're sick, you should be able to see a doctor. If you're sick, you should be able to get your medicine. That's all it's saying. So when we're asking for progressive policies like Medicare for all, nothing we're asking for is radical. We're just trying to play catch up with the rest of the world. What's radical here is to insist that we can't do this, that we're too uniquely incompetent or incapable or dysfunctional or backwards to get this done. The only thing that's radical here is the status quo. It's barbaric. And I think at this point, we're done waiting on politicians who keep making excuses for why we can't do what the rest of the world already has done.
Thank you, Mr. Rajput. Congresswoman Dingell, same question to you, ma'am. You need to unmute, Congresswoman.
Sorry about that. COVID has put a magnifying glass on the fractures that exist in our healthcare system. And passing Medicare for all is one of the most important things we can do. But that is what we need to do when we elect a new president and take the Senate back and get Democratic, so that we have people that we elect people that care about people. But I'm focused on the short term right now, which is what we have to do. This state of Michigan alone, 14% of the population is African American, but 43% of the deaths have been in the African American community. I myself have lost almost 40 people that are family members or close friends to COVID. And I know too many people that have had to, people that were afraid if they did have symptoms to go get a test because they were worried if they could afford the test. And if they did have it, could they afford to stay home for 14 days? We've seen people that 4 months ago, we didn't think were worth paying $15 an hour. We need to increase the minimum wage. We need to pay people a decent wage because these people are now the glue of our society. I had intensive care nurses, one at University of Michigan, who called me, who was writing her last will and testament, and said to me, you must make sure that if I die, my child does not go into foster care. Our nurses, our doctors don't have enough PPE equipment. We need to be ensuring, we saw General Motors and Ford start to make the ventilators that were needed, but we're now hearing there's a shortage of PPE equipment again. We need to bring into the president, we need a new president, quite frankly, a president who will wear his mask, which would simply save more lives just by showing what we need to be doing as responsible individuals when we are near people. But we also need to make sure that we have what we need if there is a second spike, which unfortunately may be happening.
Thank you, Representative Dingell. And Congresswoman Dingell, you have the next question. More than 20 million Americans lost their jobs in just the month of April due to COVID-19. The impact on Michigan has been even worse than most of the rest of the country. All this economic wreckage will cause Michigan to have a projected $3.2 billion budget deficit. What should Congress do to ensure adequate unemployment compensation going forward and to increase jobs, especially among Michigan's poor and middle class?
Well, we need to. Michigan's one of the hardest hit states in this country. 1 in 4 people don't have a job right now. Even the chair of the Fed said we need to be investing, spending money now. What we need to make sure of is that there's too many people, as I spoke about before, who are afraid to go get a COVID test or afraid to say that they may be positive because they can't afford to miss 14 days of work. We need to, what we did in the first bills and we did in the HEROES bill that the Senate needs to take up yesterday, would one, ensure that nobody has to, in the short term, worry about how they're going to live, that we continue and expand on unemployment, that we make sure that they can put food on the table. We have a food shortage. We need to improve food accessibility and make sure that no one is going hungry. We need Medicare for all, but well, we can't get it in the short term. If someone's sick, they need to be able to go to the doctor. We need to make sure we don't lose a generation of children in education. And how are we going to educate our children? We need to make sure that people have a roof over their head. We have a fund in the HEROES bill that would provide rent assistance and mortgage assistance and assistance to the landlords that may own a home and they can't afford to waive the rent for someone for 12 months. We need to help people out that way. And state and local governments need immediate help so that they are able to pay their frontline workers, their fire, the police, the first responders that are responding. People are being laid off. Our teachers need to be paid what they're worth. So there are a lot of issues that we need to be addressing, and the HEROES bill that we passed needs to be passed by the Senate very quickly.
Thank you, Congresswoman Dingell. Mr. Rajput, same question to you, sir. And you need to unmute. Good.
Thank you for the question. So right now we are in an unprecedented pandemic and also unprecedented recession. So we have never had the economy halt so quickly because of circumstances that are out of anybody's control. So one thing that we need to do is we need to recognize that we have double-digit unemployment. Many of the jobs that people have lost they have not been able to regain, even as states have started to open up. So many people in this country are now living without an income. And unfortunately, the rent payments still come month after month. What we need to do is cancel all rent, mortgage, and utility payments for all people in this country in this moment. And also, we need to make sure that we have a fund for small landlords who get their income from that rent payment so that everybody is taken care of. And now that we're seeing that there are second waves and there might be second lockdowns and that people might have to go on unemployment again, even if they regain their job, that those people will be taken care of because, as we know, rent is a huge portion of one's paycheck. Well, something else that we need to do in order to get us out of this massive unemployment is we need to look to history and we need to look to the example of FDR. And FDR, after the Great Depression, got us out of that depression by creating many jobs that needed to happen in order to build the infrastructure we need. That infrastructure right now is necessary for, that infrastructure that we need is a green infrastructure through a Green New Deal. And with the Green New Deal, we would create millions of good paying green energy jobs in order to transition our entire economy off of fossil fuels in the 10 short years left that we have to act on this issue. So this is something that I support, and at this point, Congresswoman Dingell does not support, but I believe that the best way for us to create many jobs and get us out of this recession is through a Green New Deal to create many public sector, green energy, unionized jobs.
Thank you, Mr. Rajput. And the next question goes to you. The U.S. Department of Education has been pushing for schools to reopen rapidly this fall, even though COVID infections are still increasing. How should the reopening of education in the United States be properly managed to protect the safety of our children and our teaching staff?
Absolutely. Well, I'm not surprised at all. I'm sure none of us are surprised here that that message is the one that is being promoted by our federal government, because our federal government right now does not care about the American citizens. It does not care about our health. It does not care about our economic security, our financial security. It doesn't care about anything regarding the people. All it cares about is making sure that big businesses are able to stay afloat. So right now in our country, we have a president who doesn't wear a mask, as Congresswoman Dingell pointed out, who is stoking culture wars. We have an education secretary who is a billionaire and who is not interested at all in educating the youth of this country. So we have so many people who are not interested in doing what is right for the children of this country. And we need to make sure that when we are reopening schools, we are doing it safely, and we're doing it not because of an arbitrary timeline that may be linked to an election cycle, but because it's actually what is right for our kids and it is what's right for our communities. So if we're putting our children at risk, if by extension we're putting their parents and their grandparents at risk, if more people are going to die because of the pandemic and because we're not opening schools safely, but we're opening them because we're rushing, that is not the action that we need our federal government to be promoting.
Thank you, Mr. Rajput. And Congresswoman Dingell, same question to you, ma'am. And you need to unmute. There we go.
Thank you for the question. We need to be on a timeline that ensures that we are keeping our children safe. Unfortunately, our governor this week has made it clear that she is going to do what keeps them safe. You know, there are a lot of very complicated issues as you have this discussion, and we need to make sure that everybody is at the table. Fortunately, this is a state level, though the federal government needs to make sure that we are giving assistance to higher ed and K through 12 programs. But we need to worry about how we're going to feed our children. Many children, the only meal that they get is when they're at school. And one of the things that we did in the CARES bill that we passed right after the pandemic began was to ensure that children who count on those meals at school would be able to still be fed through programs that have been developed for summer school programs. We have to make sure that those programs continue. We need to make sure that every school district, some are better off than others, that children that have to learn online, if that is an option, have the tools that they need. We need to include the teachers in the conversation. We need to think about issues like what the cost is going to be. Although you can't you have to put a price tag on, but teachers aren't going to be able to teach as many students. How are you going to keep the students 6 feet apart? Do they wear masks? Do they not wear masks? Bus drivers aren't going to be able to drive buses and make sure that the children are apart on the bus. School districts in the 12th district are saying it's going to cost them $5 to $6 million a month for PPE equipment for the schools. So there are a lot of issues people don't even think about, and the teachers very much have to be part of the discussion, school superintendents, the school boards, but we also need to make sure that our children have basic needs being met, that they aren't losing an education, and that we are taking care of them physically.
Thank you. Thank you, Congresswoman Dingell. And you get the next question also. Michigan has experienced environmental contamination and destruction in recent years. For example, the Gelman dioxane plume in Ann Arbor, the contamination of the Kalamazoo River, the Flint water crisis, the collapse recently of the 2 private dams in Midland, the deterioration of Line 5 under the Mackinac Bridge, threatening the entire Great Lakes with oil spills, and widespread PFAS contamination in our drinking water. What are your priorities and strategies for protecting Michigan's waters and environment?
Well, all of those issues that, again, thank you for the question. All of those issues are critical priorities that we've got to face. We do need to worry about eliminating carbon from our environment, but these are very pragmatic questions that are impacting all of our communities. The plume that has been in Ann Arbor has been there for 40 years. I'm very proud of the fact that I have brought all the stakeholders together who have argued for years, and the corporate polluter there has managed to use that tension and that fighting against each other to keep from a solution being reached. It is back in the courts, and if that is not done, we are looking at, the local communities are looking at potentially filing an EPA Superfund. PFAS is poisoning our waters in the Huron River that goes down through the Detroit River. People can't eat fish. I was at a town hall meeting and a man said to me, when am I going to be able to eat these fish? I rely on them to eat. Well, I didn't have the heart to tell him, but I had to, that it's probably going to be 30 or 40 years. We finally it has taken years, and I'm very proud that the Dingell bill passed the House of Representatives in January. But you want to know the single most important thing everybody can do if you want to help clean up these waters and take environmental action that's critical for so many things? Elect a Democratic president. Vote for Joe Biden. And I hope you're going to re-elect Gary Peters, but we need to ensure that we are taking back the Senate. This president has rolled back almost 100 environmental protections that are protecting our Great Lakes. Protecting our water is not a priority of this administration. And we have got to make sure. A Clean Water Act in the 1960s was singularly one of the most important bills passed, and we cannot let him continue to roll back these environmental protections. We have to invest in cleaning up our waters.
Thank you, Congresswoman Dingell. Mr. Rajput, same question to you, sir.
Absolutely. So you pointed out many great examples of the environmental degradation that is happening in this country because we do not value the environment. We do not value environmental justice at a governmental level. The Flint water crisis has been a great example of environmental racism in this country, where we feel like, oh, because a community is a community of color, because they're a low-income community, well, they can live in an environmental degradation because they don't have the means to be able to advocate for themselves. An example of that is really prominent in our district is the south end of Dearborn. If none of you have been to the south end of Dearborn, I highly recommend you go. It is a whole different world. When you drive through the south end, you have to roll your windows up because the pollution is so bad all of the time. We were knocking on doors before the coronavirus pandemic in that region. People will come out and they will say that they will have to wash the side of their homes because so much grime accumulates, but it'll come back right in a week, and then they will take their finger, rub the wall, and there'll be a layer of grime on their finger. So the environmental racism that exists in this country and our state, when we neglect communities of color, needs to be addressed. And also, we need to make sure that while we're addressing these more local issues, we cannot ignore the single biggest environmental issue of our time, the single biggest issue of our time, which is climate change. Climate change, it's an existential threat to humanity. We have less than 10 years left to cut our carbon emissions in half if we want to keep our planet healthy and habitable. If we do not, we will experience longer, more intense heat waves, crop-killing droughts, and continuing sea level rise. I mean, climate change is a threat as big as war. If a foreign country were to wreak as much destruction as climate change has through storms and wildfires in our nation, we wouldn't hesitate to go to war. Well, so why are we so hung up on the Green New Deal? Our community supports it, but right now our representation does not. Why could that be? Is it because of donations from fossil fuel donors? I mean, FDR's New Deal saved our nation. The Green New Deal can save our planet.
Thank you, Mr. Rajput. And the next question goes to you as well. With so many people in Michigan losing access to health care caused by their loss of employment, what strategies should Congress implement to deal with the increasing number of Americans without access to health care in the midst of this terrible COVID crisis?
Absolutely. So that goes back to the first question, but like Congresswoman Dingell said, we need to be thinking about what we need in terms of our desired vision, but also what we can do in the short term. So right now, something that we can do in the short term is, if we can't pass Medicare for all in this moment, we can reduce the Medicare age down to 0. So that is a way to get everyone on healthcare, on some form of healthcare, so that they can go and make sure that if they're sick, they can get a test. If they're sick, they can go and get the treatment that they need. If they're sick, they don't have to play a guessing game of if they have coronavirus or if they don't, so that they don't end up actually getting in the ICU. There's so many ways that we can right now make sure that our healthcare system provides healthcare for everyone, but the single best way ultimately will be to enact a Medicare for all system. Although we will not be able to get that system under Donald Trump, it's imperative that we keep fighting for it ferociously, so that the second that we do have a Democratic president, we as a country know that that is what we are ready for and that is what we are fighting, and we won't settle for anything less. If Canada can do it, if every other developed country can do it, if developing countries can do it, if Vietnam can do it, if so many other countries can do it, then they can certainly do it here. I know the stories that people tell me now that I'm running, it's wild. I know somebody who is from Mexico. During every spring break trip, they have to go down to Mexico, drive 10 hours from where they are in Texas to get all of the healthcare needs met for themselves and their family. That's not right. Someone from Vietnam has come here. Their single biggest issue is medical debt because they don't have that issue in Vietnam. They just have it here in the United States of America. So at this point, we are long overdue. We need a single payer healthcare system. This isn't crazy. Canada has it. I mean, how radical is Canada? It's like the nicest, most pleasant country that exists. If Canada can do it, if everyone else can do it, we can do it here.
Thank you, Mr. Rajput. And Congresswoman Dingell, same question to you, ma'am. And you need to unmute.
Medicare for all, universal health care is singularly the most important thing that we have to and we cannot stop fighting for. And we are the only industrialized nation in the world. There are some that like to say that we can't afford it or we can't not afford it. But not only that, it's an economic issue because our businesses are competing in a global marketplace where other businesses don't have to pay that cost. We do need to worry about the immediate short term. This administration, again, I hadn't even practiced this, but we need a new president. That's the single most important thing that we can do. While we're having this discussion right here, this White House is at the Supreme Court trying to take healthcare away from people that have pre-existing conditions. They are the people that are at their highest risk of healthcare problems right now. We need to make sure in this immediate pandemic that COVID tests are free and that if you do get sick, you don't have to worry about staying home, that we can take care of them. We have to lower the cost of drugs and make sure that drugs are available. But one of the discussions we do have to have is with some people who are represented by labor organizations that are afraid that they might lose what they have now. What they don't recognize is that they could lose that at any time. And many companies are taking healthcare away. And if something happens to your job, how are you going to be protected? If you're an auto employee right now, if you are a UAW represented employee, you still have healthcare when you retire. If you're a salaried employee, you lose it, gone at 65. We need Medicare for all. No American in this country, when they are sick, should have to worry about whether they can afford to go to a doctor. I remember the mother of a diabetic child who said to me, if we don't get this, if this president is able to take away protection for someone with a pre-existing condition, will my child even live to be an adult?
Thank you, Congresswoman Dingell. And candidates, this will be now our last question for both of you. Congresswoman, you get the first bite at this last question. As you know, this year marks the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage in the United States. The League of Women Voters has always advocated for access to voting. However, some states recently have drastically reduced the number of voting locations, even as the COVID pandemic has made crowded voting locations dangerous. What should Congress do to meet the challenges of safe and accessible voting in the era of COVID-19?
One of the first bills, thank you for the question. One of the first bills that the House of Representatives passed this year was H.R. 1, which was protecting our democracy. And in the House, we are trying to put more money into elections, and we are trying to do everything from campaign finance reform, which would overturn Citizens United, go to public financing, so would increase transparency. It's one of the most important issues we're facing. This November election, we hear many times this election is the most important election in our lifetime. This election is going to determine our future. And we already know that 4 years ago, Russia tried to interfere in our elections. We need to be protecting our ballot system. We should be doing paper ballots so that we had that kind of protection. And in every state, I would hope Republicans and Democrats alike, taking the lead from the League of Women Voters, will ensure that the maximum number of people can participate. We should be doing vote from home for every potential of eligible voter in the country. We shouldn't be discouraging it. We should be encouraging safe voting. But we need to make sure that those polls are open, that they're enough so that there aren't long lines, people aren't discouraged from voting, and then that when it comes time to count those votes are going to be counted safely, that no one's going to be able to try to harm or endanger the outcome of our elections. Our vote is the most important thing each of us has to participate in the democratic process. We need to encourage maximum participation. We need to protect maximum participation. And we need every one of you to participate in these elections. Your future is dependent upon what happens in November.
Thank you, Congresswoman Dingell. Mr. Rajput, same question to you, sir. You need to unmute. There.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for the question. So right now, we live in a democracy, but we need to make sure that we're still able to exercise our democratic rights. And the way to do that in the middle of our global pandemic is by making voting as accessible as possible. So voting by mail, online voting, also voting, making it easy for people to get their absentee ballot. Right now, we've had, as everyone knows, a slew of Republican legislation to try to stifle different communities from participating in the political process. And we've had so many debacles that we've seen in the past couple months where people have really had their right to vote completely thrown away, when so many polling places close, when elections are, when people are required to go to the polls in the middle of a wave of coronavirus cases. That puts everyone at danger, and that stifles voting. So we need to make sure that we increase access to voting. However, we also need to make sure that we fight for our democracy and make sure democracy functions well by reducing the influence of corporate money in our elections. Right now, we have representatives who are taking millions of dollars from corporations and who are not serving the interests of the people, they're serving the interests of the corporations. And as we all have heard, or as many of us have heard, right now, public opinion and what the public cares about, it has zero correlation with the bills that actually pass in Congress. Well, how could that be? How could that exist in a democracy? Well, right now, what we live in, it's not much of a democracy. It's an oligarchy. It's an oligarchy that's controlled by corporate interests and by interests that are diametrically opposed to the interests of working people in this country. So I believe that we need publicly financed campaigns, and we need to elect representatives who take no money from corporations. And I'm the only candidate in this race that takes no money, corporate PAC donations.
Thank you, Mr. Rajput. And thank you, candidates, for answering those questions so well. And now it's time for our closing statements. We will begin with Congresswoman Dingell for the first closing statement.
There. Thank you. I want to again thank the League of Women Voters for all they've done in the history of this country for protecting our democracy and for giving us this opportunity for a forum for an exchange of ideas between the two of us. I am asking for your vote on August 4th because I believe that we all need to work together, that our democracy means that we all need to participate, and that I want to work with the working men and women of the 12th district, from the auto plants to the students at the University of Michigan to the senior citizens. The senior citizen who told me when I did a wellness check on her about if she was doing okay, that said our country had already made a decision that she was disposable. We need to make sure that every person in the 12th district knows that somebody cares about them, they're valued, and keep working together. I'm worried about the fear and division dividing this country. We need to remember that as Americans, united we stand, divided we fall. And I want to keep working to keep us together as Americans. Thank you.
Thank you, Congresswoman Dingell. Mr. Rajput, may we have your closing statement, please?
Yes, for sure. So I got into this race because the establishment has totally failed us. All they know how to do is to think small. But it's that same small thinking that's gotten us into this mess in the first place. I think by now it's clear to everyone that we can't just keep putting band-aids on our broken systems and expecting things to change. We need to go out there and fight for the big, bold policies that are going to address our issues at a fundamental structural level. Things like Medicare for All, a Green New Deal, making college free, eliminating student debt, defunding the police and apportioning a piece of that funding to investing in community services, and getting big money out of our political system. But we've begged and pleaded with our politicians for a long time to go out there and fight for these big changes, and they've ignored us time and time again. And after a while, we have to realize that we can only beg for so long before it's clear that these people, they're never going to go out there and fight for what we need to get done. They're never going to change. So if we want to get this stuff done, we got to go do it ourselves, because at this point, we're done waiting.
Thank you, Mr. Rajput, and thank you, candidates, for participating in this valuable session. I will now turn this back over to Sue for our closing comments.
The League thanks the candidates for participating in tonight's forum and for those who've contributed questions. All our candidate forums will be available for streaming on your computer or smartphone. Go to our website, lwvannarbor.org, and look for the link to the programs. In addition, these forums can be viewed on Community Television Network. You can also find the forums on the YouTube channel for the League of Women Voters of the Ann Arbor area. Please urge your friends and neighbors to watch the forums. For additional nonpartisan information on candidates and ballot issues, go to vote411.org. VOTE411.org. The League's voter resource guide covering local, state, and federal candidates and current proposals that will appear on your ballot. With the passage of Proposal 3, all voters in Michigan are now eligible to cast an absentee ballot. In addition, while voters are encouraged to register early, Michigan law now provides for same-day voter registration if you go in person to your local clerk's office. So remember, no matter how you do it, make sure you vote in the Tuesday, August 4th primary election. Thank you and good night.